Hello ladies and gents, it's Sam here with an update for you about the RPG. Now you may not have met me before because I'm taking over from Ben in part 2 of the RPG, but you may have come across me in some of the Unreal courses or a couple of other Unity courses that we have going. So the purpose of this update is to show you the progress we've been making in the prototype of the RPG. We've previously been doing this as a live stream. We're experimenting with a bit of a different format where we give you a bit of a shorter form, quick digestible video. So without further ado, let's dive in and see what's going on. So this is the RPG you know and love, more or less. Let's go ahead and hit play and I'll show you what I've got going that's a little bit different. So there's these dialogue systems that Ben had started to put together already, where it's basically the same kind of click target stuff that you've got elsewhere, and very ugly graphics deliberately because we're going to be changing those out. So the idea here is that if I click on one of these guys, I can start a dialogue with him. You can see here that I'm deliberately stealing from Monty Python just as some test script. So he says he's the bridge keeper, ask me these questions, 3 air the other side, you see. So I can tell him to, no, never mind, and then he goes, oh, off you go then. Or if I said, ask me the questions, bridge keeper, then I've got, what is your name? I can choose between the 2 dialogue options here of saying that I'm Sir Lancelot of Camelot or Sir Robin of Camelot. And if I go through the Sir Robin option, because that's a bit more funny, then you go, what's your quest? Hey, okay. And then what's the capital of Assyria? And you may not know this one. If you follow the dialogue direction that Sir Robin takes in the films, then arg is the response because you get thrown off the cliff. So currently that's not really hooking up to things. It is going to hook up to stuff a little bit later, but currently not. So that's that. There's still some holes in it. It needs to finish the dialogue when you actually leave the dialogue and so on. But the really cool stuff is going on behind the scenes here because I've created a dialogue editor. If we go to the window, then I can open up this dialogue editor, which looks like so. And if I have a dialogue asset selected, I can see this hierarchical tree of the dialogue, and I can edit any of these texts and it is going to update the dialogue. So let me show you how we might add another option. Like maybe another option response to what is your quest. I can go ahead and right click, create a new node. All this is UI that I've created. It's not built into Unity. And I can say, I don't have one, like that. And I can hook it up by right clicking, adding a connection, and so on and so forth. And then I can create nodes, I can delete nodes, I can clear all the children, so I can break all these child connections and add them back, like so. So you can see it's a pretty full-featured editor. You can move the nodes around and so on and so forth. Obviously, it's not completely full-featured, but it's definitely a great starting point for you to get going. And I just wanted to show you that this dialogue editor is actually writing back to the asset file because the asset file is just a prefab. And for the time being, I've left it all visible, all the data that's in the prefab. It's a bit ugly, a bit hard to read, but basically what we've got is an array of nodes. And you can see there's 21 nodes here in my conversation. I'm calling this asset a conversation. And each node has got the following properties. It has a UUID, so that's a unique identifier for the node. It has got a position that helps us position it in this node editor. It's got some text, which is obvious. And then it's got a list of children, which some of them have children, some of them don't. Let's see if we can find one that does have children. Here we go. This has got a list of children, and that is just a list of the UUIDs that this should link to. So it's fairly straightforward. It is a kind of graph-based view, and that's pretty much what you would expect for representing one of these things. If you sat down and thought about how you might represent a graph, this is probably what you would come up with. So let me just give you a quick tour of the code base. So we've got the conversation CS, which is the scriptable object behind this. There you go, scriptable object. And as you can see, it has a list of conversation nodes. The conversation nodes are really super simple. They are just that UUID. They're all public. It's just the UID, position, text, and list of children. So the conversation CS has a few interesting things going on. So let me go into it. We've got a public API to add nodes, to get the node by a specific UUID. We've got for deleting nodes and getting the root node, basically the nodes that don't have anything pointing to them, that makes it a root node. So this guy has nothing that it is the child of, so it's a root node, and there's an algorithm for finding whether you are the root node. And interesting bit here is that we have this onValidate call, which basically means that if I went and changed anything over here, it would call onValidate, which does some checks and balances first and foremost. So it will make sure that we remove any child links that point to UUIDs that have been deleted, for example. So that does a little bit of a cleanup for us. But what's also interesting is it allows us to call out, I've created a delegate here, a delegate to say when validation has been called, because basically anytime this changes, it could be because you've checked out in Git, it could be because you're changing it directly here in the inspector. What happens is it will redraw all the UI in our dialog editor. So I'm able to go and put something in here. Let's see, my name is Sakamalotov, I don't know, donkey, to use Ben's naming convention, and you can see that it's automatically changed in the editor without me having to hit save or anything. And it even supports undo, so I can Control Z and undo, and a lot of that is given to us by Unity. So let me give you a quick overview of what's actually going on in the dialog display, as I call it. That's the gameplay part where we're clicking around inside our options. It's fairly straightforward. We have our active conversation being set by a voice component on the person we're talking to. So we click on them, their voice component activates and finds the dialog display and sets the current active conversation. Each voice, each character will have its own conversation asset linked to it. So we are going to set that. We're going to set the current node, which if it's a new conversation is going to be the root node. So it sets the root node as the current node. Then it updates the display. So it will set the NPC text from that root node, and it will clear any response objects. The child objects basically will be the responses in our dialog. So say this is the NPC node, then the child nodes are going to be the two responses you can have. Fairly straightforward. It clears those out of the list of responses in the UI. It then creates some nodes for it. So what it will do is it will go through each of the child nodes of the conversation node. It will instantiate the response prefab for the UI, get the specific node by ID. So we've got a child, but that's an ID. It's not actually a node. So you have to get the node from the list of nodes by ID, straightforward. And then we update the properties of that prefab, the response object, and we hook up a button here using something you may not have seen before, which is an anonymous function. So basically it says call this block of code when the button gets clicked, and that basically goes and calls choose response, which goes ahead and sets the current node to the child of the response node. So if I click on I'm not ask me the questions bridgekeeper, I'm not afraid, then the next node that's going to be set is going to be the what is your name. So that's how it works, basically from a very high level. And there's some cool stuff going on in the editor too. Let me give you a quick, brief look at that. Don't worry if you're not understanding this. This isn't meant to be teaching, by the way. This is just meant to show you the cool kind of a taste of things that are to come. And obviously in part 2, we will cover it in much more detail. That's our whole point of having a course about this. This is just a teaser, really, I guess. So, and obviously this is a teaser because I haven't done the lectures yet. This is just me giving you an update as I go through. So we have got some editor scripts, a dialog editor script in particular, which is derived from editor window, which allows it to pop up like that. We've got some boilerplate code around showing the editor. And this one's interesting. On enable, it's kind of like on start. It is a message from the editor, which basically says that when this window pops up, we want to have a look at the current selection. So we have a look at, we're basically actually registering for a callback here. This is a delegate. It's asking us when we get a selection change, call this function, and then also call this function the first time as well. And then when we get a selection change, it's going to set from the active selection. Basically, it's saying what is currently selected in terms of prefabs. And as you can see, it's casting it to conversation. So if the current thing that's selected is not a conversation, we don't care, and it's going to be set to null. and then we set and register a callback. That's what I was talking about just before, this onValidate delegate that we had on our conversation, which basically says call onModelUpdated every time the conversation has been changed. That's what allowed us to change the model over here. I'm calling it the model, it's the scriptable object. Allowed us to change the scriptable object, and the dialog was able to update. And what that does is it reloads our nodes and it repaints. And there's a whole process in here of taking the data out of that conversation object and drawing that data. And in fact, what it's doing is reloading the nodes, because we've got another class that represents it in each individual node, just to make it a little bit easier to separate out the code. And that's responsible for drawing itself and responding to click events that allow us to create, delete, link, and so on and so forth. So there will be a link to the repo at where the current stage that I'm at, along with this video. Let me just get my face up again in front of you guys, because we're done with the code. That's some fun stuff for you to have a poke around with if you want to. You can go ahead and download any of this stuff that I have been creating. It's all up on GitHub. I will link you to the branch for this particular dialogue set of changes that we've just talked about, and you can go and have fun, have a play around, and have a look at the code base and the sections of it that I didn't quite cover but just glossed over. And I'm really looking forward to teaching this stuff to you guys, and looking forward to giving you a new update same time next week. See you there.